The sea took Thomas Finch without warning. One moment he stood on the deck of HMS Glowworm, gripping a frozen railing as waves crashed over the bow. The next moment he was gone, swallowed by the grey North Sea as casually as a man might swallow a crumb. No scream reached the bridge. No hand waved above the churning water. The ocean simply opened its mouth and closed it again, and a 23-year-old sailor from Portsmouth ceased to exist. Lieutenant Commander Gerard Roop saw it happen. He stood on the bridge of his destroyer, watching the storm punish his ship, when the lookout's cry cut through the wind. "Man overboard!" Roop turned in time to see the empty space where Finch had been. The railing still swung from where the young man's hands had slipped free. April 1940 was a dangerous month to be a British sailor. The war was 8 months old, and the Royal Navy patrolled waters that grew more hostile each week. German submarines prowled beneath the waves. The Kriegsmarine grew bolder. And now, unknown to Roop or anyone aboard the Glowworm, German invasion forces were steaming toward Norway under cover of the same storm that had just killed Thomas Finch. The Glowworm was a G-class destroyer, built in 1935, displacing just over 1,300 tons. The Germans had a nickname for ships like her. They called them tin cans, small, thin-skinned vessels that existed only to escort larger ships and die quickly when real warships appeared. Roop had heard the term. He did not find it amusing. His tin can carried 4 4.7-inch guns, 10 torpedo tubes, and a crew of 149 men who trusted him to bring them home alive. That trust weighed heavily now. The Glowworm had been escorting the battlecruiser HMS Renown northward as part of Operation Wilfred, a mission to mine Norwegian waters and disrupt German shipping. But when Finch went overboard, Roop faced a choice that would define his command. He could maintain formation with the fleet and leave a man to drown alone in freezing water. Or he could turn back and search, knowing that every minute spent looking pulled his ship further from the protection of the Renown's massive guns. Regulations allowed him to abandon the search. The man was almost certainly dead. The water temperature gave a swimmer perhaps 15 minutes before hypothermia took hold. By the time Roop could turn his ship around, Finch would be gone. Lieutenant Robert Ramsay, the torpedo officer, stood nearby. He was young, ambitious, and practical in the way that promising officers often were. He did not say what he was thinking, but Roop could read it in his face. The search was pointless. They should rejoin the fleet. Roop gave the order to come about. They would search until nightfall. The crew responded without complaint. Whatever doubts they held, they kept silent. A captain who would risk his ship to save one man was a captain worth following. Down in the engine room artificer Henry Gregg pushed the boilers harder than he liked, fighting the storm to give Roop every knot of speed. On deck, sailors scanned the waves with binoculars, searching for a shape that was no longer there. They searched for hours. The storm did not ease. Radio contact with the Renown grew weaker, then failed entirely. By nightfall, the Glowworm was alone in hostile waters, separated from her fleet by miles of angry sea. Thomas Finch was not found. Roop stood on the bridge as darkness fell, knowing he had made the choice that felt right and wondering if it would kill them all. His ship was now isolated in an ocean that belonged to the enemy. German submarines could be anywhere. German surface ships could be steaming toward them at that very moment. And he had thrown away their safety to search for a dead man, but his crew had seen what kind of captain he was. They had seen him choose one sailor's life over military efficiency. They had seen him refuse to abandon hope even when hope was gone. In the days to come, they would need that knowledge. They would need to believe that their captain would fight for them the way he had fought for Finch. At dawn on April 8, Roop ordered the search abandoned. The Glowworm turned north to rejoin the fleet. The men were exhausted, silent, grieving in the quiet way that sailors grieve. Thomas Finch would have no grave. The sea keeps what it takes. Then the lookout called out. A shape in the fog, barely visible through the grey morning mist. For one wild moment, Roop hoped it was the Renown coming to find them. It was not the Renown. The silhouette was wrong, lower, sleeker, foreign. As Roop raised his binoculars, the shape resolved into hard lines and gun turrets. A German destroyer. The enemy had found them first. The tin can had wandered into a trap. And the trap was about to close. The German destroyer emerged from the fog like a wolf stepping out of shadows. Her name was Z-11 Bernd von Arnim, and she was hunting, for 3 heartbeats. Both crews stared across the grey water. British sailors frozen at their stations. German gunners reaching for their triggers. 2 ships that should never have met, thrown together by a dead man and a storm. Then the gun spoke, and the war became real. The Bernd von Arnim fired first, her shells screaming across the waves toward the Glowworm's hull. Roop shouted orders as explosions tore the water around his ship. Hard to port. All guns engage. The Glowworm answered with her own 4.7-inch weapons, orange fire blooming from her turrets as she turned into the fight. This was destroyer combat, fast, brutal, and unforgiving. Both ships displaced roughly the same tonnage. Both carried similar armament. In theory, they were equals. But the German had friends nearby, and Roop had no one. The ships circled each other through the swells, trading salvos while waves crashed over their decks. Gun crews struggled to aim on pitching platforms. Shells fell short or flew wide as both vessels rolled with the storm. The Glowworm scored a hit on the Bernd von Arnim's superstructure, tearing metal and sending smoke billowing across the German's deck, but something was wrong. Roop watched through his binoculars as the enemy destroyer turned away, breaking off the engagement. She was not running from damage. She was not retreating in defeat. She was leading them somewhere. Lieutenant Ramsey appeared at Roop's side, his face pale beneath spray and smoke. He held a message slip from the radio room, a German transmission they had partially intercepted. Most of it was encrypted, unreadable. But one word came through clearly. Hipper. Roop knew that name. Every British naval officer knew it. The Admiral Hipper was a German heavy cruiser, one of the most powerful surface warships in the Kriegsmarine. She displaced 14,000 tons, 10 times the Glowworm's weight. She carried 8 8-inch guns that could destroy a destroyer from 5 miles away. And somewhere in this fog, she was coming. The German destroyer was bait. The Glowworm had been lured into a killing ground. Roop could turn and run. In the fog, with his ship's speed, he might escape before the Hipper arrived. He could rejoin the fleet and report what he had seen. No one would blame him. Destroyers did not fight heavy cruisers. That was not bravery. That was suicide, but Roop understood something that the tactical manuals did not teach. These German ships were heading somewhere important. They were protecting something, troop transports, perhaps, or supply vessels for an invasion. If he ran now, he would never know what the enemy was planning. But if he stayed, if he shadowed them and sent warnings to the fleet, the Royal Navy might be able to respond in time that he made his choice. They would pursue. Below decks, engine room artificer Henry Gregg felt the ship surge forward as Roop called for more speed. The old artificer had served on destroyers for 15 years. He knew the sound of engines being pushed too hard, the smell of machinery running hot. He looked at the young stokers around him, boys barely old enough to shave, and showed them how to brace themselves. When the big shells started falling, he told them, "Hold on to something solid and pray." On the forward gun platform, Petty Officer Walter Scott checked his weapon for the 20th time. He had a photograph of his daughter tucked inside his coat, pressed against his chest. She was 7 years old and believed her father was invincible. Scott hoped he would not prove her wrong today. The Glowworm plunged deeper into the fog, chasing an enemy she could not see toward a monster she could not fight. Minutes passed. The German destroyer's shape flickered in and out of visibility, always just ahead, always drawing them forward. Then, at 9:50, the fog parted like a curtain. The Admiral Hipper filled the horizon. She was enormous, longer than 2 football fields, bristling with guns, her armored hull cutting through the waves with the confidence of a predator who feared nothing. Her forward turrets were already turning, tracking the tiny British ship that had stumbled into her path. Roop stared at the cruiser through his binoculars. He saw German sailors scrambling to battle stations. He saw the massive 8-inch guns settling into firing position. He saw Death wearing gray paint and swastika flags. The tin can had found the beast. Now she had to survive it. Roop's voice was steady when he gave the order. Make smoke. Signal the fleet. And prepare to fight. The glowworm had perhaps 20 minutes to live. Her captain intended to make them count. The fourth salvo from the Admiral Hipper found its mark. 8-inch shells, each one weighing over 200 pounds, slammed into the glowworm's bridge with the force of a thunderbolt. Glass exploded inward. Steel screamed and twisted. Men were thrown across the deck like dolls, their bodies broken before they hit the ground. Lieutenant Commander Roop tasted blood. His ears rang from the blast. Through the shattered windows of his bridge, he saw the German cruiser closing, her guns already reloading for another volley. Smoke poured from wounds in his ship's hull. Fires burned below decks. And the Hipper was still coming. This was the mathematics of naval warfare in 1940. The Admiral Hipper's 8-inch guns could fire accurately at 27,000 feet, more than 5 miles. The glowworm's 4.7-inch weapons had perhaps half that range. The German cruiser's armor could shrug off anything the destroyer threw at her. The glowworm's thin steel hull offered no protection against heavy shells. In every measurement that mattered, the British ship was outmatched, but Captain Helmuth high aboard the Hipper faced a problem of his own. His cruiser was escorting troop transports for Operation Weserübung, the German invasion of Norway. 1,700 Wehrmacht soldiers were distributed among his ships, waiting to land at Trondheim. He could not let this damaged British destroyer escape to warn the Royal Navy. He had to finish this fight quickly. High pushed his cruiser into the smoke screen that Glowworm was desperately laying, hunting for the kill. Roop used the smoke to buy time. His ship darted through the gray clouds, invisible but not safe. The Hipper had radar-directed guns, technology that most British ships lacked. The smoke that would have hidden the glowworm from human eyes did nothing against German electronics. Shells continued to fall, guided by invisible waves, punching through the destroyer's hull. The forward gun was destroyed. The radio room was gone, taking with it any hope of warning the fleet. The bridge was a ruin of twisted metal and broken bodies. Lieutenant Ramsey, bleeding from a gash above his eye, reported that the torpedo tubes were damaged. Only one mount still functioned. Roop listened to the reports with the calm of a man who has accepted his fate. His ship was dying. His weapons were failing. Running was impossible. The Hipper was faster and could shoot through any smoke screen he laid. That he looked at the men around him. Boys from Liverpool and Cardiff and Plymouth, from small villages whose names he would never know. They had come aboard trusting him to bring them home. He could not save them. But perhaps, he could make their deaths mean something. The order came quietly. Hard to starboard. All ahead full. Stand by to ram. Silence on the bridge. Then Ramsey repeated the order, his voice cracking only slightly. The helmsman spun the wheel. Down in the engine room, Greg heard the command relayed through the voice pipe. He did not hesitate. He pushed the engines beyond their limits, giving his captain every knot of speed the dying ship could muster. The glowworm burst from her smoke screen with her bow pointed directly at the Admiral Hipper's hull. Fire streamed from her wounds. Her remaining guns blazed defiance. Her siren screamed across the water like a banshee's wail. Captain High saw the attack too late. He ordered his helm hard over, trying to turn the massive cruiser away from the charging destroyer. But 14,000 tons of warship does not turn quickly. The Hipper was still swinging when the glowworm struck. The collision was catastrophic. The destroyer's bow crumpled against the cruiser's armor, steel crushing steel with a sound like the world ending. But momentum carried the glowworm forward, and as she scraped along the Hipper's side, she tore open wounds that no one expected. 130 feet of armored plating ripped away. The cruiser's starboard torpedo tubes were destroyed. 2 compartments flooded. 500 tons of seawater poured into the German ship before damage control teams could seal the breaches. The Hipper, the mighty cruiser that had seemed invincible, was bleeding. The glowworm drifted away from her victim, broken beyond repair. Her bow was gone. She listed heavily to port, fires consuming her from within. Men began jumping into the freezing water, preferring the cold sea to the flames. Petty Officer Scott fired one last shell from his destroyed gun platform before the flames drove him back. Engine Room Artificer Greg kept his men calm as water poured into the machinery spaces, guiding them toward the exits with steady hands. Lieutenant Ramsey, thrown from his station by the impact, pulled himself up in time to see what they had done. The tin can had bitten back. The tin can had made the beast bleed. At 10:24, the glowworm's boilers exploded. The ship broke apart and sank, taking 109 of her crew with her. But on the deck of the Admiral Hipper, Captain High stared at the destruction and knew that this victory had cost him dearly. His ship would need months in drydock. The invasion timetable was in chaos. And a single British destroyer had done what no enemy was supposed to do. She had refused to die quietly. She had refused to be a tin can. The water was so cold it felt like burning. 40 men floated in the North Sea, clinging to wreckage, coated in oil, watching their ship disappear beneath the waves. Behind them, the massive shape of the Admiral Hipper loomed through the smoke, the monster that had killed them, now turning toward their broken bodies. Lieutenant Commander Gerard Roop treaded water among his men. His uniform was torn. His face was blackened with soot and blood. He had escaped the sinking bridge only seconds before the boilers exploded, throwing himself into the sea as fire consumed everything he had commanded. Now he watched as the German cruiser's engine slowed and her hull swung broadside to the current. The Hipper was stopping. The enemy was stopping. Captain Helmuth High stood on his damaged bridge and made a decision that transcended the war. He had watched Roop drive a burning ship into his cruiser rather than surrender. He had seen courage that demanded respect, regardless of which flag it served. Military logic said he should leave the survivors and continue to Trondheim. Every minute spent here risked his mission and his damaged ship, but some things mattered more than missions. High ordered his cruiser to heave to. He positioned the massive vessel so that the sea current would carry the drifting survivors toward his hull. Then he sent every available man to the rails with ropes and ladders, German sailors and Wehrmacht soldiers alike, reaching down to pull their enemies from the freezing water. The rescue was desperate and chaotic. Survivors grabbed ropes but could not hold on. Frozen hands slipped on wet hemp. Men who had survived the battle and the sinking died within feet of safety, their strength finally failing at the moment when salvation was closest. German soldiers knelt on the Hipper's deck, hauling oil-soaked British sailors over the rails, wrapping them in blankets, pouring hot coffee down their throats. In the water, Roop refused to save himself. He swam from sailor to sailor, guiding exhausted men toward the ropes, helping them secure life jackets, pushing them toward the hands reaching down from the cruiser's deck. He gave away his own life jacket to a young stoker who could barely stay afloat. He spent his last reserves of strength making sure his men had a chance. Lieutenant Ramsey watched from the Hipper's deck, where German hands had already pulled him to safety. He saw his captain in the water, moving from man to man, refusing to think of himself. He shouted Roop's name, begged him to come to the ropes. Finally, Roop swam to the cruiser's side. A rope dangled above him. German sailors began to pull. Ramsey watched his captain rise along the hull, hand over hand, almost to the deck. Almost safe. Then Roop's hands opened. His frozen fingers could no longer grip. He fell backward into the gray water, disappeared beneath the surface, and did not come up again. The sea that had taken Thomas Finch 2 days earlier now took the man who had searched for him. Of 149 men who had served aboard HMS Glowworm, 31 survived to reach the Admiral Hipper's deck. They were taken below, given dry clothes and medical attention, treated not as prisoners but as fellow sailors who had fought with honor. Captain High visited them personally. He told them their captain was a brave man. He meant every word. The survivors were transported to Trondheim, then to prisoner of war camps across Germany. They would spend 5 years in captivity, carrying the story of April 8, 1940 in their memories. Only after the war, when Lieutenant Ramsey finally returned to Britain, would the full truth become known. But High did something remarkable before the survivors left his ship. Through the International Red Cross, he sent a message to the British Admiralty. He described the battle in detail, the hopeless odds, the smoke screens and torpedo attacks, the final ramming run that had damaged his cruiser beyond quick repair. And he recommended that Lieutenant Commander Gerard Broadmead Roop receive the Victoria Cross, Britain's highest military honor. It was one of only 3 times in the entire Second World War that a Victoria Cross was awarded based on an enemy's recommendation. The award was announced on July 6, 1945, making Roop the first recipient of the Victoria Cross in the war. By then, the Glowworm had been gone for 5 years. Her hull rested somewhere on the seabed near Norway, keeping company with the men who had gone down with her. Ramsay received the Distinguished Service Order. Petty Officer Walter Scott, Engine Room Artificer Henry Gregg, and able seaman Reginald Merritt received the Conspicuous Gallantry Medal. Their names joined the long list of ordinary men who had done extraordinary things when the moment demanded it. The Germans had called British destroyers tin cans, fragile, disposable, beneath contempt. But on April 8, 1940, a tin can had charged a heavy cruiser, rammed her at full speed, and torn open her hull. A tin can had shown that courage could not be measured in tonnage. A tin can had taught the Kriegsmarine that the smallest ship could carry the largest heart. Years later, a historian asked one of the Glowworm survivors what he remembered most about that day. The old sailor thought for a long moment, his eyes distant, seeing waves and smoke and fire across decades of memory. "The captain," he finally said. "Swimming in that freezing water. Helping everyone else. Never thinking about himself." He paused. "That's what I remember. That's what I'll always remember." The tin can was gone. But the story remained, a testament to the men who sailed her, the captain who led them, and the enemy who honored their sacrifice. Some things are larger than victory. Some things survive even when ships do not.